If you're a commercial producer of organic fruits and vegetables and are interested in new tools for your IPM toolbox, then stay tuned. I'm Nick Skinner from the Mount Sinai Light and Health Research Center, and I will be discussing how ultraviolet can be a safe, effective, and economical control measure for your farm, and also how rapidly developing UV LED technology is shaping the future of UV use in agriculture. Producers know that disease control measures are often necessary to improve crop performance. Growers who have chosen organic production have fewer effective control measures to choose from than conventional growers do. Because fewer products are available to begin with, the development of pathogen resistance is a more serious issue for organic growers. Ultraviolet light, or UV, has been safely used for more than a century in applications such as water treatment, air disinfection, food pasteurization, and recently has shown efficacy for controlling plant disease in the field. So let's take a minute to understand what UV is and why it is a good fit for agriculture. UV is electromagnetic energy, which can come from natural or man-made sources, and has wavelengths shorter than visible light, ranging from 100 to 400 nanometers. The band from 100 to 280 nanometers, which is known as UVC, is the focus of this video. UVC is only available from artificial sources on the surface of the Earth, since the atmosphere filters out all UVC produced by the sun. There are many advantages for UV when it comes to plant disease management. First is that it is a non-ionizing form of radiation energy, so it is okay for organic growers to use it. It leaves no residue. There is a zero re-entry interval time, a zero pre-harvest interval time, and it can be applied in windy conditions or when crop foliage is wet. Also, by virtue of how it works, and we'll get into this in a minute, we haven't seen any evidence of resistance development in pathogens. The fundamental quantity that we use to describe the amount of UV energy which we are applying is known as dose. Dose is calculated from three factors: irradiance, or how bright the UV is; time, or how long the UV is applied for; and efficiency, which is a weighting factor based on how susceptible the pest is. Altogether, the equation looks like this. Or in simpler terms, it's just how much light is applied, for how long, and how sensitive the pest we are treating is. There are multiple ways to achieve a targeted dose. In the example illustrated here, a dose of 10 joules per square meter can be provided with various combinations of irradiance and time. For example, you could apply 10 watts per square meter of UV for 1 second, 1 watt per square meter of UV for 10 seconds, or 3.2 watts per square meter for 3.2 seconds. The important thing is that the product of these two numbers is equal to 10. It should be noted that this holds true over a large range of irradiance values. However, there are limits. For example, if the irradiance is exceedingly small, many organisms have countermeasures that prevent UV from being effective. If the irradiance is too high, it can create secondary effects like heat generation, which can cause undesirable side effects for the host plant. Recall that the third term of the dose equation is efficiency. To understand this better, let's look at how UV inactivates pathogens. As UV photons penetrate into the pathogens, they can strike strands of DNA. When this happens, they disrupt the DNA structure, which either kills or renders the pathogen unable to reproduce. The ability of UV to cause this damage is dependent on the pathogen's sensitivity to the wavelengths of UV being used. This plot shows the relative sensitivity of an example pathogen to 254 nanometers, which is the primary wavelength produced by common low-pressure discharge sources of UVC. Effective doses for pathogen inactivation are generally influenced by two factors, the first of which is size. Larger pests, like fungi on the top of this chart, require much higher doses than smaller ones, like bacteria and viruses at the bottom. Accordingly, size will be the first guiding factor. The second factor is how darkly pigmented the pest is. For example, lightly pigmented powdery mildew is much more susceptible to UV treatment than its much more darkly pigmented counterpart, downy mildew, which requires much higher doses to become inactivated. Increasing UV dose will result in improved disease control. At the same time, it will also increase the damage to the host plants. The data to the right show how beet plants inoculated with Cercospora leaf spot responded to various UVC doses. From the photos above, you can see the increasing phytotoxic effects to the beet plants as doses were increased. So an effort should be made to balance disease control with overall damage to the host plants. The crossing point is often a good dose starting point. However, a range can be adjusted higher or lower depending on the crop needs. In some cases, we may favor the preservation of foliage, and we would select a lower dose in this case, whereas in other cases, we may want to choose a higher dose to lower the overall disease presence. As a final note here, there is evidence to suggest that exposure to UVC prior to the introduction of pathogen can actually stimulate an immune response in some plants. We have seen this in grapes, for example. Besides dose level, another important consideration is when during a day a UV treatment is made. Day versus night matters, and here's why. Nearly all organisms, plants, animals, and pathogens alike, have a DNA repair mechanism, which is powered by the short wavelength blue components of visible light. Here, the mechanism is illustrated for plants, but the process is similar for other organisms. The important lesson to take away from this is that the pathogens we are trying to treat will immediately go about repairing themselves if UV treatments are made during the daylight hours, thus reducing the efficiency of the treatments. Therefore, to maximize the effectiveness of UV treatments, application should be made during dark hours, with several hours of darkness left after the treatment, so that the damage done to the pathogen's DNA can become permanent. Now that we've learned a little bit about how UV works, let's get into some example agricultural use cases. We've affectionately named the UV treatment devices used in our trials as dragons, which only come out at night. The photo on the right shows a UVC dragon, which was designed to treat summer squash, at work, at night, treating powdery mildew. Dragons come in many configurations, and you can see a few here. The design is mainly driven by crop configuration, namely small versus large canopies, over row versus side row, UV pod mounting, and so on. Here is an example of how a unit is constructed. The photo on the left shows the underside of a dragon unit designed to treat cucumber vines. This unit uses 6 fixture units, each containing 4 UVC lamps, like the one shown in the photo insert, for a total of 24 lamps. Currently, most UV dragons are farm-built devices. An extensive set of DIY plans are available free of charge to interested producers at the link shown here. We will also provide this link in the video description. Let's talk a little about some examples of how UVC has been used to treat crops. In this particular example, we compared the powdery mildew severity on strawberry plants treated with conventional fungicides, another group which was treated weekly with UVC at 85 joules per square meter, and a group which remained untreated. As you can see, the untreated group had the highest disease incidence. No surprises there. But you can also see that the UV treated group outperformed both no treatment as well as the grower's conventional fungicide program. The cost savings as well as the better health result of the strawberry plants result in UV being a very cost-effective approach for strawberry powdery mildew management. Let's take a look at the effectiveness of UV against a bacterial pathogen, angular leaf spot, in this case, on summer squash. The photo to the right shows plants which received only weekly treatments of a copper-based fungicide. This photo shows plants which received weekly treatments of UV only at 240 joules per square meter. The really interesting thing to note about the plants in these two photos is that they were in the same row and were the same age and transplanted at the same time. The only difference is that the ones on the left got UV treatments and the ones on the right did not. You can see from the table that the UV treated plants had a much lower disease severity than the copper treated plants. But you can also see the difference in the overall size and health of the two treatment groups. Now let's look at how UV fared against cucumber downy mildew on an organic vegetable farm. For treatments, we had an untreated group, a group that was treated with weekly treatments of the grower's organic fungicide program, daytime treatments of UVC at 240 joules per square meter, nighttime treatments of UVC at the same dose, and a combination of the grower's standard organic program and UV night treatments. You can see from the chart how all these conditions stacked up against each other. But one point worthy of note here is that the untreated plots were heavily browsed by wildlife, and accordingly the disease was slightly lower. Based on the findings of an equivalent study, we would actually expect the untreated plot's disease to be slightly higher, as shown here in orange. The daytime UVC treated plants had nearly the same disease as the untreated plants, which we expected based on the earlier discussion of daytime DNA repair mechanisms. The UVC night treated plants had lower disease severity than the untreated condition, but was not as low as the grower's standard organic program. Higher and possibly more frequent UVC doses should improve this performance. One surprise was that the combination treatment of the standard organic practice and nighttime UVC treatments wasn't more effective, an effect that we've consistently seen in other studies. The reason for this, we believe, is that part of the grower's standard organic program was a biological product, which we believe was being inactivated by subsequent UV applications. The lesson here is that it's important to apply UV before other treatments, particularly if you plan to use them in combination with each other. Now let's revisit our dosing guidance chart and see how various doses perform for different pests. For cucurbit downy mildew, we've tried doses as high as 480 joules per square meter twice per week and still haven't been able to achieve the same level of control as the grower's spray program. Cucurbit powdery mildew, on the other hand, is a different story. Doses of 240 joules per square meter once per week was enough to achieve as good or better control than the grower's spray program. The main difference here being that downy mildew spores are heavily pigmented when compared to powdery mildew spores. Finally, angular leaf spot, which is a bacterial disease, is extremely well controlled with only 240 joules per square meter once per week. So what about the safety of UV use? The predominant risk to users is the development of a skin burn. UVC doesn't penetrate deeply into the skin, so burns usually only affect the outermost layers, which ultimately peel and then regrow. There are some simple controls and precautions that can be taken to prevent this from happening, however. First, the installation of reflective curtains, like the one shown here, will limit the amount of UV that escapes from inside of the UV unit. Tractor cab glass blocks UVC, and no extra PPE is required if you're operating a dragon from within a cabbed tractor. However, if you are operating it from an open station tractor, you should cover exposed skin with clothing and protect your eyes with a face shield or a tightly fitting set of polycarbonate safety glasses. Now let's take a brief look at some of the economics associated with UVC treatment. We performed a treatment cost analysis for cucumber downy mildew during the 2020 season and made the following assumptions as part of the analysis. 1 acre of cucumbers is being treated. The growing season is 7 weeks long. We are applying UV treatments twice per week at 480 joules per square meter, and that is being done with a 2-row UV dragon. And for our comparison case, weekly treatments of a standard organic program would have a rotation of 2 different fungicide combinations. Based on these assumptions, we calculated a treatment cost of $581 per acre for the standard organic treatment program, $159 for UVC treatments alone, and $740 for the combination treatments. In a subsequent year, we also performed a payback analysis for the treatment of powdery mildew on summer squash. We made the following assumptions. First, this is for a 1 acre plot of summer squash. The squash dragon has a base cost of approximately $14,500. UV is applied twice weekly at a dose of 240 joules per square meter, and the cost to apply those treatments is $221 for the 9-week growing season. Based on our yield model, which we developed, a predicted yield increase of 52 hundredweight per acre results from the improvement of disease control relative to no treatment at all. Market value of the squash is $81.75 per hundredweight, and a monetary discount rate of 5% was assumed. What is not included in this analysis is any labor other than the cost of UV applications and expenses like transportation. The reason for this is that these costs would be incurred regardless of whether you were treating for powdery mildew or not. So here's what the model predicts for your cumulative cash flow. Think of this as the effect on the overall balance of your bank account. For this case, the break-even point would be at about 4.1 years. After this point, the increased production and the profits from its sale of the UV treatment relative to none at all have finished paying for the equipment and are now being translated into pure profit instead. Also, it's worthy to mention briefly that we looked at the useful life of the dragon and its components. Essentially, the only 2 components expected to have a limited lifespan are the UV lamps and the electrical generator. With the expected lifespans you can see here, the dragon will provide most producers with at least 15 years or more of service. So now let's discuss UV producing technology and its future. The most common current technology for the production of UVC is known as low-pressure discharge lamps. They're very similar to fluorescent lamps but have been optimized to produce predominantly UVC. Their main output is at 254 nanometers, which is slightly less than the maximum DNA absorption wavelength of 260, as you can see from the chart on the right. From the chart on the left, you can see that their predominant output is again at 254, but they also do produce output at many different wavelengths, including some in the visible band. This is why we can see a glow emanating from under our devices like the UV dragons. Like fluorescent lamps, low-pressure discharge lamps are available in many different tubular shapes, including linear, twin tube, and so on, and at a wide range of wattages from 9 to 150 watts. However, these lamps are not without shortcomings, particularly for agricultural use. They are made with quartz glass tubes, which has food safety implications if broken. They are highly temperature sensitive with a peak output around 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which you can see in the chart on the upper right. Also, and most seriously, these lamps contain mercury, which means their obsolescence is on the horizon, particularly because the European Union will be phasing them out by early 2027. The good news is that UVC LED technology is rapidly evolving. You can see in the photo the size of an actual UVC LED currently in production. As LED output continues to improve, the UVC treatment speed can also increase, which will ultimately make UVC treatments more economical and practical for producers. Cost is also rapidly improving. In fact, the cost per watt of UVC LEDs is expected to be equivalent to low pressure discharge sometime in the next 5 years. The Light and Health Research Center has been working with LED manufacturers to develop a standard-sized UVC LED module, which can easily be arranged into arrays. The photo on the right shows an actual UVC LED module prototyped, developed as part of a conservation innovation grant. The modules are designed to have the same output of UVC per unit area as a light fixture equipped with low pressure discharge lamps. However, these modules are more robust than LPD lamps and are more temperature stable as well. Additionally, they do not contain mercury, which means they are not subject to the EU mercury regulations. Here we see how standard UVC LED modules can be configured into various shapes and sized arrays for different purposes. The concept on the right shows how they could be used in an enclosure similar to a hooded sprayer for use on small crops in rows. On the left is a concept of how an orchard/vineyard sprayer could be equipped with UVC module arrays. In this case, the sprayer would have 2 arrays with a total of 88 modules each. The arrays fit within the wheelbase of the sprayer and would have a total UVC output of 750 watts. Having UVC equipped on a sprayer like this is a logical extension, since the combination of treatments of both UV and spray programs often perform better than either alone. If UV is applied at the same time as a spray program, the labor associated with UVC application can be saved completely, making these combination treatments much more economical for producers. Thank you for your interest and to our sponsors for the support of this work.